body, your body chemistry changes. That's very well documented. Life-affirming chemistry is developed from life-affirming emotions. And then on the quantum level, these emotions leave our body and are mirrored in this field around us as the physical experiences in our lives. So it's as if we're living this cosmic feedback mechanism, and we're in conversation with this field in every moment of every day if we have the wisdom to recognize what the field's saying to us.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I can also see where for some people, if the welfare check's not on time, or if they can't find a job, or if they don't have an education, how would you recommend that the average person try to feel abundance when they have none at the moment?
Well, Jim, that is the great question about the great workshop of life. It is whether or not we are going to react to what the world shows us, or if we choose to create the feelings in our lives as if our greatest desires have already come to pass. And I know it's not an easy thing to do. I think it's perhaps the great lesson, the universal great lesson that we're all faced with. When we choose to feel peace in our bodies and give thanks for the peace in the world, and then you turn on the 6 o'clock news and you look at what's happening in the world, it's easy to feel that the prayer has no effect. And what the ancient texts say, and what the living cultures who practice this mode of prayer say to us today, everywhere from the Andes Mountains of Bolivia and Peru into the monasteries of Tibet, and even I'm talking to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico today, and even our families here in the desert Southwest, the native traditions, all of them say that the key is not to buy into the illusion that the world is showing us, to create what we would like to live inside of our bodies, give the world something to work with so it can mirror it back, but not to buy in and get caught up with what the what the world is showing us. And we all know, of course, we watch 6 o'clock news. That's really not the news. That is a very narrow perspective that someone has chosen to show us, and it's usually about fear and about lack. And if we focus on that, then that's precisely what the field is going to be sending back to us.
The field is not only narrow, but in many instances spun.
Well, precisely, and there's a whole conversation we could have about that. But the key regarding this field is that it is a neutral field. It's unbiased. It doesn't necessarily care about right, wrong, good or bad, light or dark. It simply mirrors what we are creating as individuals and collectively in our families, our communities, our nations, and as a planet. And it's such a subtle yet very powerful concept, and it's also such a very, very different way for the Western mind to think about our world, because we believe we've got to go out there and hammer creation into submission. We've got to make these things happen through a lot of effort in our outer world. When you leave the Western culture, however, in the Middle East, in the Eastern cultures, and the indigenous cultures, the Aboriginals, and all through the Andes in South America, it's a very different way of thinking about things. They say the change all happens from within. That's where the big work happens. You don't have to go out into the world and hammer the world into submission. You make the changes inside and let the world respond. Well, and I think ultimately that's a very powerful lesson that we're all going to learn at some point.
Right. Like you said, it's very subtle but very powerful. That reminds me of years ago when I studied transcendental meditation, and there's a great dichotomy in there because you have to force yourself to allow yourself to relax your mind. And that sounds like a complete dichotomy, but you have to, from the inner core of your being, change your perception.
You do, Jim.
But it changes your perception.
Sure. Well, when they ask you to relax your mind and you do it for a few moments, and then your mind starts to get busy again, how do they address that? What do they say to do?
Oh, well, in that particular methodology is the chanting of a mantra.
So, in other words, you're doing something to break the cycle of whatever it is that's happening in your mind.
Yes, I was taught that what you do is you do not fight against your thoughts, but you let them come and you let them go and just let them pass right on through until you can reach that meditative alpha state.
Well, I think in those traditions, everyone's addressing this in different ways. We know the field is out there. Western scientists acknowledge it. Ancient traditions, it's a given in these ancient indigenous traditions. That's the least of their concerns. And we're so excited to find this field is out there. First time I shared it with a Native American friend of mine, he honored me by letting me ramble on about this field for a couple of minutes. And then he was silent, and he said, "Yeah, so."
Yeah.
So we've been
tell me something.
Sure, he said, we've been saying that for years. He said, now what are you going to do with that field? And that's exactly what scientists are asking. They said, okay, this field's out there, okay, and it looks like emotion has an effect on the field, and at least in some instances, they said, now what do we do with this relationship? And this is where science, I think, is it's young. The scientific method is only about 400 years old. Science is rediscovering, in a language that they're comfortable with, principles that were already very well established for thousands of years before science came along. So it behooves us, and I support the scientific method. I'm a scientist, and it behooves us when our science runs up against something that doesn't make sense or they don't understand, to go back into another way of knowing, into another kind of knowledge, and see what that knowledge says about the mystery of science and how the two may work together. And in that way, as I've said before, I think we're creating a wisdom that's greater than the science could ever be unto itself, or greater than the ancient spiritual traditions could be, because this wisdom is the best of both, married into something that really helps us to become better people and feel better about living in this world with one another, and by virtue of that, create a better world. And I think ultimately that's what we would all like. We're going about it in different ways, and I think we all would like to have that.
Exactly. Now, to prove some of the power inherent in this feeling and in this emotion, in your Secrets of the Lost Mode of Prayer, you cite several studies that have actually shown that and demonstrated that when a tiny but significant number of people all begin to alter their perceptions and alter their feelings about what's going on in the world, that it actually has been picked up on scientific instruments. Is that correct?
It has, and there are two topics there. One, the scientific studies done in the 1980s during the Israeli-Lebanese conflict in the Middle East, showing statistically the number of people required to jumpstart and affect change in a community. And that number they showed was the square root of 1% of a given population. Take the number of people in a community or a city or a nation or a world, for that matter. You take 1% of that and the square root of that number, and they're relatively small numbers of people that can feel a very specific quality, such as peace, in their hearts, and have that peace mirrored in their community as reduced numbers of traffic accidents or violent crimes against people, or in the Middle East, terrorist acts of terrorism. And this was published in the Journal of Conflict Resolution in 1988. It was the International Peace Project in the Middle East. So we know that people have an effect on the world around them through this field. We may not fully understand how the field works. We know there's a correlation, there's an effect. The second part of this is Princeton University, 1998, 10 years later, found that certain kinds of electronics respond to changes in mass consciousness. And there's a whole concept, right there that people say, what? How come we never heard about that?
Now, this is
or
the Global
called
Consciousness Study, right?
Or GCP, Global Consciousness Project.
Yeah.
And people can actually go onto the website and read about this. It's www.boundaryinstitute.org, BOUNDARYINSTITUTE.org. And they talk about this project. And what they did was they developed 40 little instruments and stationed them. They placed them around the Earth and they all report back into a single computer server at Princeton University, real time. It's happening right now. And they are giving, it's